In this technique tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can frame your finished embroidery pieces rather than just keeping them in the hoop all the time. Here I have the Summer Harvest pattern that I have stitched up onto calico. You will recognise this one, it's normally on that lovely olivey green kind of colour fabric. I had a go at stitching it onto calico and I must admit I do quite like how it turned out. But I decided that I would like to put this one in a frame rather than keep it in the hoop. So in this video I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that. So first things first, I'm going to put the finished embroidery just to one side and show you what we do to the frame in order to get it ready to frame our project. So we need to take off the back, just like you would if you were going to be putting a photograph in there. And we don't need this for the moment, we can put that to one side. What we are going to need is the glass that comes in the picture frame. Now there are two different ways that you can do this, and really it depends on whether you would like the embroidery to be on the outside so that when you touch it, you can actually see the stitches, or whether you would like the embroidery to be behind the glass, just like it would be if it were a normal photograph. It's completely personal preference. Of course the glass will protect it more because then it won't be exposed, but most people like to frame it with all of the lovely stitching exposed. So once you've decided whether or not you'd like the stitching to be exposed or behind the glass, there's another decision for you to make here, and that is whether you frame the embroidery around the glass. So just to show you exactly what I mean there, whether you decide to frame it around the glass like this, or if you think the glass might be a bit thick and it may not fit kind of in the gap of the frame, then what you can do is use this backing piece of the frame to trace around something a bit thinner than that glass, maybe a piece of cardboard or thick card or something like that. So when I put the glass in this frame, you can see that it's a really snug fit, meaning that by the time I've wrapped those two layers of calico around it, it may not actually fit in that frame. So what I'm going to be doing for this particular frame is drawing around a piece of card, using this as kind of my template. So I'm just going to pop that to one side for a moment just while I do that step. So I've got this piece of cardboard here, it's white on one side and craft on the other. It's actually just something I've repurposed from packaging that I have, so it doesn't need to be anything fancy here. So as I said, we just need to use this to trace so that we get a piece of cardboard that is the same size, ready to go on the inside of our frame. So what I'm going to do there is just draw around this template, and then I'm just going to cut along those lines that I've drawn. So now I have a piece of cardboard that is the exact same size as the back of that frame, and just to test it to make sure it fits in there nice and easily with a little bit of room around the edges for the fabric. We can put the pieces of frame to one side, and now we need to get back our project that we would like to frame. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the white side of this cardboard against my project, because despite using two layers of fabric, when you use a darker surface like this craft cardboard, you can actually see that through the frame. So I'm just going to try and minimise that by using the white background. I'm going to flip that piece over so that I've got the back of my stitching here. So now I can make sure that I line that up really nicely with my cardboard, because of course I want this to be in the centre of the frame. So it wants to be about there. Now I've used quite a large piece of fabric here, and at the end I'm just going to share some tips with you on what to do whilst you're stitching your project to kind of make this process a little bit easier. But you can see that by the time we fold that over, we have a lot of excess fabric. We don't want it to be overlapping like this. What we do want, however, is about maybe an inch from the edge. So I am just going to trim this fabric. So I'm just going to cut a couple of inches of this off. That will of course vary with how big a piece of fabric you have. It may not be as many as a few inches, but we kind of only want about an inch of overhang, inch to an inch and a half. doesn't have to be dead straight, so don't worry about using like a ruler or anything here. And this way, because this side is a lot longer, it probably won't matter too much. I'm probably going to leave that as it is. So now that we have our cut piece, just to make sure that it's central, you can kind of just fold it over really roughly, just to make sure that when you flip it over, the pattern is in the middle as much as you'd like it to be. So now that we've got our fabric cut to size and our design is centered to the middle of the frame, the next thing to do is actually stitch so that we can secure this embroidery onto this piece of cardboard that we have cut out. So what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to use a neutral coloured thread. I'm going to be using ecru, one of my all-time favourite colours, let's be honest. So I'm going to get off 3 strands. So I'm just going to cut a nice big length, and I'm going to split that into 2 threes. And I'm threading that onto a size 5 needle, which accommodates the 3 strands really well, and knotting the end. So essentially, just to explain the principles of this before we dive in, what we need to be doing here, so I'm going to start with one edge. I'm going to do this edge first. We need to make sure that that fabric is as tight as possible. We want to try and maintain the tension that we would get in an embroidery hoop, and that's not going to be exact because it's not an embroidery hoop. This isn't designed to actually have the same tension as that. But what we need to do is stitch from this end to this end diagonally, consistently, until this fabric is pulled nice and tight and is held secure with this kind of cardboard piece as the backing. So what we need to do for that, I'm going to bring my needle up about here, and I'm bringing it up there so that the knot is underneath. And if you like, you can just do a final check just to make sure that the design is in the middle, because once you've done this, it's going to be quite hard to maneuver it. So just make triple sure that you're happy with the placement. And then what we're going to do is put our needle through those 2 layers of fabric. Pull that all the way through. And then up on this side. Pull that all the way through. And we're just going to do that consistently. It is a bit fiddly, so just take your time with it. And we're going to be moving along in this direction until we get to the other end. This does use lots and lots of thread, so make sure you're using something you've got a lot of and that you're not going to miss, you know, not a thread you're using in the middle of a project at the moment. I have many skeins of ecru thread, so that's why I'm going for this one. So that's all the way along on the one side. And just turning that over, you can see now whether or not it's in the centre and if you're happy with that placement, which I am. I'm quite happy with that. Maybe move it over slightly, because at this stage you do have a bit more movement left in it. So I'm quite happy with that. So now we're going to do the exact same thing, going in the other direction. And the more you kind of do this zigzaggy kind of approach, the more secure the fabric is going to be on this piece of cardboard. So I'm running low on thread there, so I'm just going to slide it underneath that stitch there. And again. And then I'm just going to put the end through the loop, just like we would end normal thread on an embroidery project. Just to make sure that's nice and secure. So I'm just going to come up where we left off and continue working along . So you can probably guess we're going to go back again along the other side again, just because there's still quite a lot of movement in this and we want to make this as tight as possible. So I'm quite happy with that now. I know there's not as much up this end, but I'm happy with how that's sitting at the front. And now it just needs to be pulled on the other side. And when we do those bits on the side, it will help to kind of keep this end secure as well. So now we're going to move on to doing the other two edges. So then for these edges, if we were to just fold them over just as we did before, then you'll see that we're going to end up with these bits that kind of go on the kind of outside. So we want those to be neatly tucked away. So think of this as if you were kind of folding a bit of a birthday present. And I don't mean folding over too much, but just kind of pinch that bit inside. So where that kind of fabric folds, just use your thumb to kind of push it inwards and then hold it down, and it kind of creates this edge that's going to make it much easier when it comes to securing those edges. So because I want to hold that one in place, I'm going to grab my needle and come up through the fabric about a third of the way in, and I'm just going to secure it to that layer that we did underneath. So I'm going through that underneath layer and also up through this layer that we're just folding over. So you can see that's gone through this layer here and through this layer, and then pull that all the way through. Like so, and that just helps to secure this piece to the background while we fold the other side. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to go underneath that bottom layer . And through the top layer. It is a bit fiddly, and pull that one all the way through. And I'm just going to do that again on the end here. Just to make sure it's nice and secured. So I'm just going to tie the thread off there so that we can work on the other side. So we can do the exact same thing. So kind of push inwards where the fabric folds. Do that on both sides. And then roll the fabric to the centre. And now, because we've got something on this side, we don't need to necessarily secure it to the bottom. We can secure it directly to the other side. So just as we did for that first layer. So I'm just going to swap to a size 3 needle just because it is a bit longer, which is just going to make it a bit easier to kind of reach the span from one side of the folded over fabric to the other. But we really are just repeating that process. Pulling it nice and tight so that we can kind of maintain that fabric tension. So I've got a bit of random fabric here that's going to get in the way, so I'm actually just going to trim that off. So you can see that this is actually quite time consuming, it uses a lot of thread, but I can assure you the end result is definitely worth it. And kind of going to this extent of pulling it this tight is definitely worth it as well, just because it kind of helps to keep the fabric just that bit tighter. So when we have a peak at the front, obviously it's not going to have the same tension as an embroidery hoop, but there's not very much puckered fabric going on, which can quite often happen when you take a project out of the hoop. So maintaining this kind of tension and making sure you pull it this tight really does go a long way in terms of just helping it look better once it is actually framed. So I'm quite happy with how this is looking now, but I'm just going to keep going until I run out of thread, just because the more I go, the more secure it will actually be. So I'm just continuing until the thread runs out. So I'm just going to tie off that thread for the last time. It is quite short now. So there is our finished mounted project. The only thing left to do now is pop it into our frame. So I'm just going to grab my frame back, turn it over and pop it in that gap. Pop that in over the top. Pin it down with those horrible metal things, and then when we flip it over, there is our gorgeous framed embroidery project. So it really is quite simple to do once you know how. It is just very time consuming, and in order to try and get that pulled effect, to try and maintain as much of that tension as possible, it can be quite time consuming. But I'm really happy with how that's turned out. I think it looks super cute, and I can't wait to see any of your framed creations. There's already been some over on the Facebook group and it's been so nice to see, but now hopefully more of you will have the skills to do this for yourself as well. So one thing I said at the beginning was that I had a couple of different tips to share with you. So one main thing to bear in mind, this was made in a 4-inch embroidery hoop, and if you look closely you can actually see a bit of an outline of a circle. Now if you know that you're going to be framing your project in a frame, then I would highly recommend taking the project out of the embroidery hoop whenever you are not stitching. This is something called hoop burn, and it's very hard to get rid of once it's there. This project I actually stitched for this purpose, so I only had it in the hoop while I was stitching, and you can still very faintly see the circle of the embroidery hoop. So if you've had a project that you've had in the hoop for a very long time that you've now decided you'd like to frame, you might struggle slightly unless you're going to be framing it in a really tiny frame that only fits the size of the embroidery. Another thing to note is to make sure you have plenty of excess fabric. This was such a tiny 4-inch design, but you saw from the beginning that my fabric was a really large piece of fabric. So whilst I did trim it down, I'm glad that I had more than I had less. If you've got a project that you'd like to frame at a later date, and for example you cut around the edge of the hoop, for example here's one I've got ready for another project, but for this particular one I wouldn't be able to frame it because I've already trimmed it. So when you can see the size of this fabric compared to the frame, it wouldn't even cover the entire rectangle that we would need, let alone any excess fabric that we'd need to pull it round to the back and tighten it. So do bear that in mind when you are thinking of framing a project, and if you want to frame one that you've already done, you may well struggle with that hoop burn and if you don't have enough fabric ready to play with. This is why I quite often leave my projects with plenty of excess fabric. I don't always cut around the edges. When I'm stitching I usually leave them with quite a lot of excess fabric around the side, and that just gives you a bit more freedom with what you can do at the end. But yeah, that was our technique tutorial all about framing your embroidery project, and I'm really excited to see what you do with it. Let me know in the community if you found this useful, and of course if you decide to frame any of your projects, do share it with us there as well.